Good evening, YouTubers. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's Tuesday, 8 p.m., our regularly scheduled live stream. I hope everyone is doing wonderful. On our end, lots and lots of things are happening. Can't wait to share it with you. And of course, take every single question you have. Gonna be here until I'm finished with every single question, or my throat just closes because I can't speak anymore. We'll see what happens today. As always, this is a live stream, right? So it's all about conversations between us, right? So you put the question, I try to respond. Sometimes you just comment on what I'm saying. Absolutely fine. The trick is, as you can see in that little orange box underneath me here, that if you want me to read your comment, your question, you want me to respond, you gotta put an @youtuberlaw in front of it. On my end, that's gonna be an orange box. It's gonna tell me that you want to speak. Otherwise, I'm going to assume this is just a conversation between people online, so I'm not going to read it. Don't take it personally. Some people still, after about a year and a half worth of live streams, still think that I'm actively ignoring their questions. I'm not. They just forgot to put @youtuberlaw in front of it, so I didn't know it was a question. What's going to happen is, we've done it before. I'm going to start the stream. I'm going to speak, tell you a little bit about what's going on, basically an update on the case against Patreon. Afterwards, we'll open it up. Any question goes. Your question does not have to be limited to this particular case. You can ask about whatever is going on, anything I've spoke about before, any case that bothers you, anything you want me to look at. Everything goes. That's not an issue. As we've done this before, meaning up until about a month ago, the prior 2-3 months, I was experimenting with the idea of, once the stream ends, and normally you basically would get a recorded video to look at, I would remove that video, put it on the secondary channel, and then upload here only a summary, kind of like a short update on what's going on. I'm going to restart that. I stopped it for about a month. I'm going to restart that. So basically, this channel will not have the full live stream. That's going to show up on the secondary channel called Legal Dissent. If you haven't yet subscribed to it, subscribe to Legal Dissent. There's a link down below in the description. Here, probably tomorrow, be kind of like a summary of what we're talking about. As you go in, guys, let me see. Oh, people are already telling me that things are going great. AV looks good. Audio is great. Outstanding. Okay, so as always, gonna restart the live stream. Come back, we'll start it. This past week has been kind of like in the weeds kind of week, where you have to get into the real detail of what has to happen in order to move forward, because a complaint is a rather complex document. It's not just us telling a story, but we have to tell it in a specific way. So I had to make sure that all groups and every individual working on this particular complaint is kind of moving in a single direction, because it's very, very easy to get distracted. Think a little bit ahead. Think about what's going to happen in 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, and miss the point that we have to work very, very closely together on very, very specific, sometimes simplistic things in order to make sure that the complaint goes forward. So that's a lot of what I've been working on. I told you last week that at that time I spoke maybe to about 6 to 8, maybe a little more of the individuals that wanted to volunteer. In the past week, I've spoken to probably another dozen or so. Tomorrow, I have maybe another dozen scheduled calls with different people who want to volunteer. If you want to volunteer, you want to contribute some of your time, absolutely go to Twitter, send me a DM. Or if you'd like to, you can also go to the website, youtuberlaw. There's a link to the Discord server. You can go there. They'll give you instructions how to start the process. But we're always looking for people that want to engage and want to help out on this project. So a big part of what I did last week was actually speak to everybody, understand what people are doing, what's their skill set, what they're interested in doing, how much time they can devote to the project. And at the same time, I was working on the outline to the complaint. By Friday, I finished that outline. That was, to me, a very important part of it, because to me, that has to serve as the guiding light for everybody. Even people working, let's say, on a website still have to be guided by the complaint, because ultimately, everything that we do from tech support to content has to support what the complaint is all about. So the outline was, in my opinion, the single most important items that I could work on. I basically completed it sometime on Friday, and out of that, I basically started working on specific tasks that then complement that outline that the different groups have to work on. So a big part of what I worked on, and I start sharing this stuff today, was the different task, whether or not you're in IT or in the website development phase, what's needed in order to support the complaint today. Same thing, obviously, for the attorneys. I shared with them the complete outline, and then also draft specific tasks for the business research group that's so needed here. This is an antitrust lawsuit. It's kind of like a cross between economics and law. It's all about the impact that actions have on the competitiveness of the marketplace. And as a result, there's not only legal research, but also business research, as you can imagine, dealing with the players, right? So Patreon, PayPal, and Stripe. What do they represent in their respective market? How do we define the relevant market? The relevant market is actually a legal term, and it's a very complicated part of the law of understanding what is the market for each company and how effectively they play in that market. Are they a large player? Are they a small player? Do they have an outsized impact on the market? Can they control prices? Do they have a certain amount of flexibility? How do they acquire their client, their customers? A lot of different aspects of it all feed into the law part of it, because ultimately it's part of the law. When we're talking about collusion, or even we talk about monopoly, we're talking about behavior that then has an impact on the market. So to understand the impact, you got to understand how those players are actually playing in the market. So I basically drafted not only the complaint, but then I had to draft the specific things that the business research group has to look at. And you sit back and you look at it and you say, you know what, some of the things that I thought would be very, very complicated are actually a lot simpler, because in order to push the complaint forward, we need to simplify and actually build only the tools that we need to actually support the complaint. Like I told you before, a big part of this complaint, the big part of its success is really dependent on how well it's accepted through social media and organizations and universities. In Congress, are we getting support for it? Because what we would like is basically an expression of support that the FTC can recognize, because the FTC many times is actually responding to what's happening online. They keep track of social media. They actually, if you remember, we spoke about a couple times before, over the past year, they sent out letters to Instagrammers and YouTubers concerned about some of their behavior, whether or not they're giving proper disclosure when they are in fact being sponsored. Are their reviews as straightforward and honest as the law required? So the FTC is paying attention, and so we want to make an impact. So we need the tools, we need the connections with the universities, with the not-for-profits, ultimately with some of our representatives, in order to actually make an impact with the FTC. So on the one hand, some of the tools that we thought that's going to be a massive structure, we need a lot of tools, a lot of capabilities. I realized, you know what, if we actually simplify it, it will push what we need a lot easier, a lot faster, and we can always build the more complicated stuff later on. At the same time, some of this stuff, once you look at the actual complaint, what I drafted the outline to it, and you start extrapolating some of the economic analysis work that has to be done as part of it, you realize that's a lot more than originally anticipated, because there's a lot of information that needs to be developed and analyzed, and resources that needs to be found and brought in. And thank God for the fact that there are so many very, very talented, very smart people on the team that can take on the task. It's not something that you give one individual, because it's something that would take a great deal of time. But you've got a lot of very talented individuals, not only talented in actual data analysis and understanding how research works, but also very very creative in how to find information, where they are. A lot of people know a great deal about online research and on different platforms and different services, and are capable of lending their time. And sometimes just people that are willing just to put in the time to actually find that information and go after it. So very solid. So we've moved ahead in actually publishing to the internal business group what those tasks need to be accomplished. Hopefully we will get back together probably through some sort of a call over the next week to discuss it, really iron out some of the details so everybody's comfortable with what has to happen. Same thing with the legal group. I shared the complaint. We're going to get together and set up some sort of a call to go over the details and how to break it up and how to divide up the work. It's same thing with the IT website. You know, we are basically develop a sketch of what actually has to be developed, but there's question, there's concern. Everybody's got probably a better idea, so probably going to have a call over the next week just to iron that. But everything is moving steadily forward. We now have kind of a guiding document, which is the outline of the complaint itself. And if you subscribe to my secondary channel called Legal Dissent, you would know that I've already announced, I already did a video, I believe, Friday, maybe Saturday, I'm not sure exactly, talking a little bit about the complaint and some of the stuff, so the outline to the complaint and some of the issues that came up, and my struggle with some of the legal issues, like dealing with whether or not this is a vertical restraint on trade or is this a horizontal restraint on trade, and why that has an impact on the standard, the legal standard that has to be deployed, and how I would approach it. If you're interested, check out the last video on that channel. Should be very, very interesting. But that's essentially where we are. It was a great deal of progress in really getting a team together. I still have to speak to a good number of people. I think tomorrow I have literally straight, without any break, maybe 15 different calls, one after the other, with lots of very talented people that want to get involved. The deal is, you know, let's talk, let's figure out what we can do, and then put you into the process. I believe right now we have as many as 42 people as part of the overall team, but we can always use certain people. We're definitely looking for, I know that offhand we need some people with more website kind of design background. Those kind of people would be very, very helpful as we're building out. We got people that are talented in the technology part of it, engineering department, but we need some designers who have an eye for design and the way things should look like and should flow, some UI expertise. That's the kind of stuff. So there's always room for additional people to get involved. And some of the project, like I said, some of the business analysis is rather complex and can take a good deal of time. So able-bodied and intelligent people that want to get involved, there's just a lot of room for people to be involved. So very excited, nice to see some progress on it. I'm excited about the calls I'm going to have, not only with individual, but with the groups over the next week to really set the agenda and how we should move forward. So you should be able to see steady progress over the next couple of months. I hope this is helpful. I hope that you find informative. Now, let's go into the chats. As I said before, as I always say, look at the orange box. If you want me to read your comment, you want to ask a question, doesn't make a difference on what the topic is, just put @youtuberlaw in front of your comment. That tells me to read out your comment. You don't put that comment down, I have no idea that you want me to answer that question, so I'm skipping over it. It's not personal, just the only way to control it, and it happens chronologically, right? Not chronologically, sequentially, sorry. So the first, second, third. So obviously after a while, things gets piled up. Don't worry, I will get to it. I'm just going one by one. None of your questions will be lost. Everything is going to be provided to me. My wife at the same time is copying all the questions, making them available to me on Google Docs. So in the event that suddenly you see your question disappear, don't worry about it all. It's saved in a document, and I can read it to you. Now, if you want to skip the line, Super Chat is the way to do it, basically. So everything is going to be read chronologically, but when there's a Super Chat, I'm just skipping to that question, then I'll jump right back. So no requirement, it's just a way, it's like in Disney World. If you want to pay for skip the line, that's basically what it is. Oh, I actually forgot to pull up the Google Docs. I apologize here. Let me put it up. Livestream. Perfect. Mr. Giggs, how you doing? Evening, Lior. How are you? I hope you had a good day. I had a very, very good day. To me, a good day is a productive day, and I just, been getting great night sleeps of the last week, so I feel a lot better, and I'm just going through the tasks. And the good thing is I have some good people that are working with me, so it's not as if I'm just alone in my little cave working on something, so it makes it a lot more interesting. Brett Young, thanks for the update. Hopefully organization of our little movement is finished soon, so those of us without relevant specialized skill can help out somehow. There's a lot. From like I said, it's not as if, I would say that this probably the most important work, the work that can help the most, is often the unspecialized work, because that gets involved in the legal research and not legal research, in the business research and analysis and some of the content development. So there's a lot of work that for which you don't necessarily need specialized work, because you can support and develop and get the work. And since you're working in a group, you're not alone, so you don't have to do it all yourself. So yes, there's a certain reality here. And sometimes when you get a lot of intelligent people, everybody wants to jump forward and do a lot of work. My role often, I think, is just to slow things down a little bit in order to make sure that we are moving steadily in the right directions. I've been part of organizations before where everything everybody starts working, and as a result, you lose sight of the goal. And the goal here is very, very specific and has to be done in a specific way. So it's kind of important that we do it. So to the extent to which it's a little slow, I apologize, but I'm just trying to direct kind of the ship in a specific way so that the product we hand over to the Federal Trade Commission has a good chance of succeeding. Sith, AV seems good, thank you. Paul Delaney, audio is good, outstanding. PNC, Pillar of Autumn. Ooh, cool name. How lucky do you think that this case is going to stir up big conversation? Well, that depends on how good we are in doing our job. I mean, at the end of the day, the success of the case is dependent on us basically promoting it well, because the FTC is likely to take it on the more that it thinks it's going to make an impact. So how likely it is to start a real conversation? Well, if it doesn't start a conversation, it will just not succeed. So a huge part of the success has to do with, anything from building the website to actually building content, sharing it, connecting with a lot of creators, connecting with universities, with law schools, with non-for-profits, with representatives, with senators. All of that is part of the story. So we are not forgetting that that's important. Yes, the document has to be absolutely, in my opinion, just world-class. When we hand it over, we have to feel very, very proud of what we turn over. But in many ways, I'm not concerned about that, because, this is kind of like what we do, right? I mean, attorneys don't generally turn over things to whether or not it's a court to their clients. That's kind of half-assed. So it's going to be good. The trick is, can we work together as a group to really turn this into a conversation? Because that's the big question here. Can we make more? Can we promote it, essentially? Can we promote the conversation, make people understand how important the topic is? That's why I'm doing lots of different interviews, lots of different collaborations, because I'm trying to get the word out that this is what's happening. Thursday alone, this Thursday, I have 3 different interviews. By the way, I'm going to be on live stream with Sargon at 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, which should be great. But I have 3 different interviews. Some are recorded, some are podcasts. That one is a live stream with Sargon. So a lot of things are happening. Hopefully our efforts will bear fruit. Red Risotto, are you wearing a button shirt to look more professional for the trolls marching in? This is hardly a professional look. You have to understand that the way I dress on camera, that's the way I dress for work. So it's not as if when I go to work and I meet clients, I dress up in a nice shirt and a tie and a suit. I never do. I feel like I'm choking. So clients have had to learn over the years that I'm very, very dressed down with jeans and a t-shirt. Luckily, I usually work with tech companies, so that's not an issue at all because that's how they're dressed. So I don't really work, let's say, with bankers and large companies that are much more formal. So this is hardly formal. I'm just a little colder because in Florida, our winter is here and it's, I don't know, 58 degrees, which probably sounds very warm to a lot of you. But for us here in Florida, that's winter. Sir Lydium Illyrium? I think so. Did you speak to Sargon of Akkad? No, not yet. I just spoke to his PA arranging the live stream this Thursday. It was actually supposed to happen last Thursday. Didn't happen. We're gonna do it this Thursday in 2 days at 3 p.m. But I haven't spoken to him yet. No. Patman Sports. I wonder whether Patreon had pressure put on them by downstream service provider, PayPal, etc., to remove certain people or be cut off. Is this something that could have happened? That's something that very much could have happened. My suspicion here, because of what we're looking at, remember that we are looking at events that are pointing toward collusion, right? That Patreon banned Sargon, a lot of free PR is placed on Subscribestar. PayPal moves to kill off Subscribestar, company for which there is no basis for actually seeking revenge on, if we call it, because it wasn't expressive. It was pretty much brand new, few creators, few supporters. It just was the unintended recipient of a lot of attention once Sargon was booted off of Patreon. So to me, the story looks like there is collusion here. And so to what end? Why would PayPal move to kill a competitor that otherwise would be hurting Patreon if it wasn't for the fact that it may have actually told Patreon, this is what's expected of you, that we need those kind of rules, whether or not it identified individuals or identified certain standards that have to be followed. That's what the story looks like. At least that's where logic seems to be headed, but it doesn't really matter, because I don't care about the conclusion. My measure of success is the FTC taking this story on and starting their investigation. This is what they do for a living. Let them figure out what happened behind the scene. My argument is that there is enough evidence to suggest collusion, which is far beyond what is legally required in a court of law to actually move past a motion to dismiss. And I think that's sufficient for the FTC to take on this case. Happy Bird, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. You're getting tons of differently skilled people asking you one common question. How can I help? For you, is this your biggest leadership role to date? Numerically, yes. I mean, I was at one point a vice president of a tech company, and I had a lot of people working underneath me, and with a lot of deliverable. We did a lot of data analysis work and had to deliver it to Walmart's, different insurance companies, different states, Medicare, Medicaid kind of stuff. So I don't remember how many people worked under me, but it's probably close to what this is now, at somewhere in the vicinity. I'm hopefully no more than I did back then. That was probably 15 years ago when that last role played itself out. So I'm trying to do a better job than what I think I did back then in kind of righting the ship and making sure that everybody's headed in the right direction. Matthew Randolph, do you have to prove that Subscribestar is or was negatively affected by the attack for the complaint? Thanks. Well, that's actually a good question, because some people would say, well, it's back online, right? Well, that's not because, so how was it hurt by it? Is there still a case? That's not relevant. If somebody attacks you in the street, there is still a crime that was committed against you, even if you are, a couple of days in the hospital and you move on. The illegality was in the attack, not in whatever damages was caused to you. Yes, if you were to sue them for damages, you would have to show damages. Well, that's different. That's a civil lawsuit. The only thing we're dealing with here is basically whether or not PayPal alone, because of its market power, or in collusion with Patreon, acted in such a way that harmed competition in the marketplace, basically has a negative impact on interstate trade. That's what we have to prove. So that's pretty much the extent of it. So being able to show that Subscribestar was down for a few weeks is sufficient. Plus the very fact that they were able to basically reduce the level of damages cost to them is irrelevant. Again, we're not suing the company in civil court. We're not seeking damages. The damages will be assessed by the FTC in on behalf of the government. Any money that they'll collect is basically goes back into the tax coffers to support whatever other efforts they are. So this is not being, since we're not suing on behalf of Subscribestar or Sargon or anybody else, the amount of damages is not as relevant. What it is the negative impact, a restraint on trade, the negative impact on the competitiveness of the marketplace. That's what we are looking at. Shane Armstrong. Hey Lior, how you doing? PR chair of the LIA here. I've been canvassing our regional groups with the request for volunteers to pass them along your way. Hope that some of them get involved. Thank you so much. I've already spoken to at least one here locally, and any of you guys, since I've spoken to you guys before, you know what you're doing. You're intelligent. Anything you can pass our way will be great. Like I said, we are looking for some more individuals in website development and some of the arts in digital design and stuff like that. That would be a big help. Alex Fry. So Section 230 basically made almost any action a platform takes equivalent to their own speech, excluding the exception of clear and imminent danger. There is basically no limit to speech. Well, no. There's two different things here. Section 230, for those of you who don't know, basically immunizes platforms against any liability associated with content that is being uploaded by their users. The free speech component is separate. They are often discussed in same cases because many platforms that have been sued, let's say, but for damages caused to the content creator, are basically calling for immunity under Section 230 and free speech, and sometimes they get their cases dismissed based on those. Most of those cases get dismissed very, very quickly. Section 230 provides this kind of a blanket immunity. But you're saying whether or not the effective impact is that since the platforms are not liable, everything becomes free speech. And yes and no. There are problems with our legal system that does not allow us to go after some other legal elements that are still there. So the practical implication is very close to what you're saying. But that does not mean that they can do whatever they want to do, because there are many, many exceptions to free speech. Free speech is not absolute, even in a country like the United States. You're not allowed to defame people. That's an exception. You're not allowed to incite people. You're not allowed to have people go attack this guy. That's an exception. And the same way that antitrust is an exception. You're not allowed to undermine competition in the marketplace. You're not allowed to put a negative restraint on trade and call it free expression. That does not work. 230 really only deals with whether or not the platform is liable for the content being placed and providing them immunity unless an exception is at stake here. Antitrust is one such exception. Sinks, hey, I'm scared about the movement against Patreon slowing down. There seems to be less people moving off the platform now. What are your thoughts on the current situation? Oh, I agree. I mean, we've talked about it before. Every single story is going to go through ebbs and flows. But if you think about the last year, maybe year and a half, every month or so, there's another story, another individual that was negatively impacted. So yes, I do think that it's slowing down because people think, okay, now they've moved on, something else is in the news. But frankly, that's part of what has to happen. That part of it is, on us to continue the story, to keep talking about it, to bring it up. And it's not as much because everybody has to be concerned about Patreon or Sargon or Subscribestar. It's because the story resurrects itself over and over again in many different forms. If it's not Patreon, it's YouTube, or it's Facebook, or it's Twitter, or it's Yelp. There are so many different platforms that basically use content that we produce to make money off of it, and yet are developing these kind of rules that allows them to eliminate us without any real repercussions. The problem is when they are then vindictive in making sure that there is no alternative platform on which people that are getting deplatformed can speak on. That's what we're ultimately trying to stop here. Because there were stories, right? There was BitChute, there was Gab, a lot of different platforms that have been impacted over time that are basically designed, if you look at the attack, to actually prevent speech from actually finding a place. If one of these platforms don't want you to speak on them, you can argue whether or not it's their right. Technically, legally, it is absolutely their right to say that we don't want your speech on our platform. That does not mean that they are allowed to collude effectively to make sure that you cannot speak on any other platform. So I hope that the greater story keeps going and that we are good enough in keeping the story alive, because that's going to play a lot into whether or not we're successful. If the story is not spoken about, if it loses steam, if people don't care about it, if they think it's already passed, then we have not done a good enough job, and the chance of the FTC taking it on is just that much harder, that much smaller. Alex Fry, the argument is usually made that if you don't like the way a platform operates, that is, if they have certain political leaning, then you can just go to a different platform that is either neutral or more inclined toward you. Or however, platforms like Google are just so large and ingrained into so many aspects of the internet, it makes it so hard to get away from them, which makes it hard for a different platform to be truly competitive. Someone could say the solution is to restrict Google's potential influence throughout their internet, but then the counter argument to that, you are somehow restricting a company's right that they would have had before they grew to a certain extent. Do you think there is any way to bridge the divide between these two issues, or is it just the reality of a current situation for the foreseeable future? I think you're making a very good point. The discussion maybe 6 months ago, about a year, was about whether or not the law should consider these platforms to be a public square, and then apply the rule as they would to a public square, where you cannot be excluded. Your ability, you are not able to be excluded from participating, from actually speaking within the public square based on the content of your speech. And we've had many videos on it and explain why that does not work. There's a very distinct rules of what is or is not a public square, and then the fact that these platforms become so big doesn't turn it. But there's a certain reality here which you allude to, right? Which says that today, these are the public square. They're so large, they're so massive. If you want to speak, this is where you want to be. So when they exclude you, it has a negative impact. Now, if you go to think before this, right? Before there were YouTubes or anything else, let's go back 20 years from now. Everybody was fighting over, can I get a permit to march in the street? Am I allowed to hold up a sign on the sidewalk? Can I go into a park and speak my mind, see who can gather, can listen to what I'm saying? Today, that's not relevant anymore. Today, we're fighting over virtual space. The only way for you to get your message across is online. Now, even back then, it's not as if the law says that freedom of speech means that you can speak, and as long as you're not arrested. So if you're allowed to stand in your bathtub and speak, that is somehow meets the requirements of freedom of speech. No. Part of freedom of speech is the ability to be in places where you can be heard. And today, that ability is undermined because the for lack of a better word, the public square as exists in reality versus what's in the law is in the hands of private parties, not in the hands of government. The thing is that there's a lot of things that can be done. There's a lot of things that can be fixed to change the whole equation, to turn the concept of they're stronger, they can do whatever they want to, and we have no choices. A lot of things you can do. What we're trying to do is one thing, which is don't undermine competition in the marketplace. Now, I'm with you that it means that new ones who are coming up are going to be very, very difficult to compete. What's the chance of a new platform competing with Facebook? What's the chance of a new video sharing site competing with YouTube? I'm with you. That cannot be handled through a legal platform. The growth of a specific platform is not in and of itself subject to antitrust law. There's argument that whether or not you can maybe spin off, the law can require them to spin off specific related businesses that somehow gives them a measure of control over behavior, that they can do things that otherwise they would not be entitled to. For instance, Google is obviously the dominant search engine. Should it be then allowed to actually integrate it with something like a YouTube or with advertisements when it controls the search and it controls who is actually being promoted on the search? Is there a conflict and could be separated? But that's kind of a different issue here. Whether or not the law can come in through antitrust law, which frankly you would have to revise some of the laws to actually make it happen and break up some of these companies into components. It wouldn't impact whether the fact that you have still small companies going after large companies. But like I said, there's a lot of things you can do. First of all, make sure that there's no collusion, so there's no concerted effort to kill off competition. That's what we're trying to do. But there are other things we can do, and this is kind of a test study, right? Can we manage as a group to work toward a single goal and have a positive impact? Because the next thing would be, well, how can we again improve this? And there are things you can do through state law, dealing in contract law and the concept of contract of adhesion, the fact that you are signing on to rules without being able to negotiate it, the fact that they can terminate you at any time with or without notice to you. There's a lot of things that can be managed legislatively through the state and can actually change the entire power structure between you and the platforms. But to get that done, we have to do one step at a time. You cannot build an organization that goes after everything. You gotta basically work with a group of people trying to accomplish one thing. So this is kind of what we're trying to do. If this is successful, then there's more. There's a lot of more things we can do to change the balance of power here, while not restricting the platform's own freedom of speech and not necessarily trying to stop them from being as successful as possible. I don't have an interest in actually breaking up any of these companies. I hope them absolutely the best. I love all of their services, and I hope that they continue to innovate and be as dominant as they potentially can be. We just want to make sure that there is enough competition in the marketplace. At least the rules are set and followed, such as there is a chance for competition to evolve over time. Mike Smith, consider getting 2 to 3 trusted with decent judgment mods here in your chat to block the blatant trolls. Since I don't see you, again, I only see what you guys write, so otherwise I don't. I mean, I see what you guys ask me, so I don't know what goes on in the chat, so it's kind of nice to ignore them. But I'll take a look at it, so I'll see what you're talking about, because I have no sense of whether or not there are trolls on the chat. Master of Osus? You're selling yourself short. The outline you prepared is excellent and will give structure to everything that the volunteers can do for you. Oh, thank you so much. I'm assuming by the name that you're one of the attorneys or law students that was shared. Thank you so much. Joel Ivory Johnson. Have you looked at the new case Prager has brought against YouTube? I have not looked at a new case. I followed and still follow their appeal of the loss of the prior one, so I'm not aware of any new case they're doing. But somebody mentioned it last time, so I'll take a look. Raleigh Mar. Greetings from fellow Floridian. How you doing? How do you love our winter here? Mike Smith. In case you hadn't noticed, you are being obnoxious in the chat. Oh, you're telling somebody, Naomi, on YouTuberlaw streams. That makes you a troll. Feel free to say anything you want on your own. Well, thank you very much. Ergonomic chair. In the end, this is just going to hurt us creators so you guys can get your free speech kicks. Free speech, fighting for free speech, fighting for the right to speak, the right to create, the right to not have to adhere to somebody else's standards, a right to build competitive platforms. That's going to hurt creators? I mean, that's the whole point here, that you have a network of companies that set rules of what they think is acceptable, and anything that does not meet that standard is no longer acceptable. If anything, fighting for free speech is the only pro-creator movement you can have. Just because your speech may fall within the middle of what is acceptable or not acceptable does not mean that that's where everybody is. Some of the greatest art in history has been provocative, have pushed the boundaries. Some of the stuff we appreciate today is because it's pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable. Some of those peoples were hounded in prior years. Those were the creators. Look at some of the greatest comedians of the last generation. They constantly pushed the boundaries. They were often excluded from some platforms, but some shows and some and were not invited to some platforms at that time, TV shows and the like, where they could actually push themselves, and yet they made a difference here. Whether it was the language they're using, the kind of jokes, the irreverence for the stuff that otherwise society considers to be so important. They're pushing the boundaries. That's what we cherish today. That's what we praise them for today. Well, why does that make a difference to us? I'm not telling you that I support any single creator with any single form of speech here. A lot of the stuff we're talking about involves speech that I don't particularly care about because it's just not my cup of tea. I don't politics and social norms and stuff like that just doesn't interest me as a topic of speech. But these are creators. These are just like Casey Neistat or Peter McKinnon or some of people that are at the top of their game within tech or within photography, within makeup, whatever it is. There are some content creators in areas that push the boundaries, and without having to agree on it, you have to accept the fact that if you want our society to grow in that kind of a direction, not to be afraid of content, but to be able to push, because that's the only way we ever grow, by pushing the boundaries, understanding what we talk about, what we can to, push the boundaries of what is acceptable. Do we actually learn from each other? So, no, this is not about free speech kicks. This is about supporting creators. This is the most pro-creator kind of topic you can be on. And if you're a creator and if you want creators to succeed, this is exactly the kind of movement you should be looking into. Trey Nitrotolene, I think that's him. Sargon confirmed MasterCard and PayPal never cut services to him. Directly watch. No, that's even a more interesting topic. Exactly what was the basis for it? Exactly. I don't have to explain what's happening inside those companies. I just have to show that there's evidence of collusion when it comes to killing off a competition. Remember here, this is not a case about Sargon. Sargon was basically like one chip along this little game, right? One little player in this game. This is a case about companies killing off potential competition that might otherwise benefit from whatever policies they're pursuing, which seems to be anti-speech, but that's not what it is. It's about competitiveness in the market. And people confuse the two. They think that this is about Sargon or what he wants to speak. It's not at all. This is about antitrust, competition in the marketplace, and whether or not companies should be the arbitrator of what kind of competition is permitted, what kind of companies should be allowed to survive and compete against them. That's all it's about. Oh. Nope, help, nope. Thank you so much for the super chat. Epic quotes incoming. Another 45-second billable paid. Thank you. Cubicle Bear. Have you considered getting moderators for your chat? I guess I need to, because people are complaining about some of the content, so I need to take a look and see what's needed and to control some of the negative chats. But I haven't really looked at it till now, so I haven't thought about it. But thank you. You'll toilet be talking shit. I hear Subscribestar is now up again, processing through PayPal. Will this get brushed aside by FTC now that the cooperation is happening now, or is history still relevant to the FTC? So the answer is, even if that was true, that would not that still would have been a violation that would need to be investigated. Them actually changing their mind would not, but Subscribestar is not using PayPal. They found another payment processor to work with. So no, PayPal and Stripe did not come back. So that has not changed. Miko Jane, could a law that prohibits payment processing companies to ban people be possible and help in the future? It's not... You could, but it's not that simple, because you're always going to have to deal with the idea that ultimately these companies, independent of the people running it, independent of the shareholders, independent of its employees, have rights of free speech. So the idea of banning them would fall under, unless certain criteria are met. So in order for there to be no discrimination in payment processing, technically you could add a category of a protected class, including, let's say, political association, political speech, maybe some content of speech into existing fair credit laws that otherwise prohibit other forms of discrimination based on race, sex, age, national identity, those kind of things. You could deal in that. That's not necessarily simple, because effectively you are creating a new protected class, and a lot of people don't have an interest in creating new protected classes. And you also have to make a declaration effectively that these websites are effectively places where you are not allowed to discriminate, right? So normally you're not allowed to discriminate in restaurants, in hotels, in apartment buildings. That was also added to when you look through fair credit into actually the provision of credit. So you'd have to do a lot more than just say you cannot discriminate in credit card processing. And then that would be challenged as well, whether or not, depending on how the argument goes, that will still be challenged under Fairest Amendment kind of concerns, but it's possible. There's probably other ways that are a lot easier, because to do something like that probably requires a broad support from Congress that probably is not there right now, because they're so ineffective in getting anything done. But it is possible, right? Because they already have that set up for credit, provision of credit, which covers, some insurance and banking, and you could stretch it out, but you'd have to identify the protected class here. And the problem is that once you identify this, could there be different kind of classes that they're not protected, that have been discriminated against? So, that is an approach, but it's kind of a temporary approach, because there'll be other ways to discriminate that try to avoid this idea of a protected class. I hope I was clear. I'm fearful that I may have not been clear. Let me know. Nate, can you explain the difference between slander, libel, and defamation? Also, the different standards of these in regards to public and private individuals. Example, David Hogg versus Naga Kids. Okay, so slander and libel are defamation, defamation being the higher category that includes slander and libel. Slander, libel, the only differential is whether or not it's a written word or a spoken word. Now, you have to be realistic that suing for defamation, whether or not written or spoken, is fairly difficult in this country because of the notion of free speech. So in this country, we are allowed to express our opinion, say terrible things, often lie about it without any real repercussion. What we are not allowed to is lie about specific facts. So I can say somebody, I think he's a thief. You cannot sue me because he was never an actual thief. He was never prosecuted, never found guilty. That's my opinion, and I'm using the word colloquially, not in reference to a specific event. If I did say that this man was prosecuted for stealing money and that didn't happen, that is a statement of fact on which you can actually prosecute. The problem when it came to a lot of these issues, a lot of the things that we see online, the terrible, terrible things we see online, is that many of those are not based on statements of facts. They often get the facts right, or they get the facts wrong, but they're not necessarily lies. They're just ways of looking at it. They often, many times, it seems kind of strange. If you take a look at a shortened video and you explain what happened to the kids in Washington, and you express an opinion based on that, however skewed that is, and even though it's false, you expressing based on that, that is not the basis for defamation, unless, of course, you can show that they knew the entire thing and they purposefully lied about it. They purposefully lied about the specific facts in order to do whatever, and that caused harm. So in this case, if a news agency has access to the entire video, not that it was just available online, but actually they had access to the video, and they saw, for instance, that it wasn't the kids who invaded the elderly man's space, but rather the other way around, but they purposefully lied about it, that could serve as a basis for defamation if you know, you have to stretch it all out to see whether or not those specific facts actually led to damages and harm and everything else. But that's how it works. We are looking for specific statements of facts that you are purposefully lying about, and it causes damages to your reputation, to your financial well-being, whatever that may be. Jim P, thank you so much for the super chat. Does platform status depends on the absence of editorial control over the neutral platform? Please clarify. If so, these are not platforms. No. Since 1996, that entire distinction is not relevant, right? This is relevant to the New York Times. Okay? So if they are publishing somebody's letter versus are they actually an editor of that information, they're working with the person to actually develop a better piece of paper, a better article, are they actually editing the content? Do they have control over what is written or not? So for the New York Times, liability does depend on whether or not they are a publisher versus an editor. Are they a platform? Are they effectively participating in the content? For online platform, that is not an issue at all. You have to understand that some politicians are mischaracterizing or outright lying about the nature of the law. The concept that they have to be neutral is absolutely not true. These platforms legally do not have to be neutral. They don't lose any sort of protection by the law because they fail to be neutral. That was the purpose of the law. The idea is ultimately, I'm not going to be liable for the content of my users, regardless of what I do now. That being said, right? So the distinction was gone. It was gone in 1996 when the Section 230 was adopted as part of the Communication and Decency Act. So that entire argument no longer matters, except not whether or not they're neutral or not, except to the extent to which they are participating. So they allow people to write. They're not liable. They remove people off their platform in whole. They're not liable. If somebody posts a paragraph and I then take out a sentence, that could make the platform liable, because now they actually took action. So their removal of a sentence could then be seen as their own actions, to the extent to which that the removal of the sentence then causes damages. They can be liable for it. They don't lose liability and then are liable for everything. Remember, so these platforms are never going to be liable when they exclude you, because the New York Times can exclude you any day of the week. They don't have to print your letter to them. That does not make them liable. This is a liability associated with either them putting something on. Are they liable for what you are saying? If you are liable for defamation, it doesn't mean that YouTube is now liable for defamation, as well as removing your content, right, in whole. It's when people start playing around with the content itself, you know, start editing it, removing certain words. That's when those platforms would lose their protection. But even then, it's only liability associated with whether or not that particular action was actually what caused the damage. So it's not gonna, doesn't open up the floodgate. It's really very, very narrow. I think so. Okay, thought I may have missed something. Nate, can you? Oh, nope. We just did that. Capstrong, get the reason a free speech absolutionist doesn't have mods, but I gotta express some sympathy for Mrs. YouTuberlaw having to wade through the dross that is chat on stream without mods. I'll ask her if she's bothered by it, but I don't see it, so I'm skipping. I'm only reading whatever she puts on. Life and death. I agree publishers should be protected, but if they do not post and follow uniform guidelines, then haven't they crossed into the world of unprotected editors and censors? Again, not anymore. That was what we had pre-1996. It hasn't existed since then. And people often think, people think because politicians tell you that Section 230 is the problem here. It's not. If you got rid of Section 230, none of the stuff we're talking about would resolve. You see, what Section 230 gives these platforms is the ability to allow you to post without being liable. They also allow them to remove you without being liable, but only to the extent to which their removal caused damages. So let's say you don't have Section 230. What's the consequence? Right? So now this whole editor, publisher, platform distinction is back in place. These platforms are just like the New York Times. They can always not allow you on the platform. They're not liable for it. Section 230 doesn't do anything about that. And so what if they allow me? Now they can't remove me, or they'll be liable for it. Well, no, because Section 230 is not the only reason why they're allowed to remove. If you follow the case law, it's both Section 230, and that's largely at the motion to dismiss phase. Section 230 allows these cases to end very, very quickly under a motion to dismiss. But ultimately, if they go further, these cases are lost based on freedom of speech. The ability to remove you is otherwise subject to protection under freedom of speech unless it's a violation of something else. And so even if Section 230 didn't exist, even now if the distinction between platform, editor, publisher is brought back into the way where it was prior to 1996, before we had modern day internet, that will not solve anything. First of all, it would mean that these platforms would not allow you the freedom to post like they do right now, because now they're liable. So now they're worried about every time you post something, is that copyright infringement? Well, now it's a bigger issue. Is it trademark infringement? Now it's a bigger issue. If it's defamation, now it's a massive issue. Is it incitement? They don't want that liability, so now they're going to put a lot more constraints on things you can post. So the whole world of Web 2.0, which was the creation of content through user interaction, that ends the minute Section 230 is on. And even if that continues, now you've got there is nothing that forbids them from removing you, because there is no law that says removing you is illegal. See, you first have to get to a point where you actually make something illegal before the removal of the indemnification is relevant. So if there's nothing illegal to discriminate based on political speech, not having Section 230 doesn't resolve that, doesn't create liability. It just removes protection but doesn't create it. So to solve this, you've got to do something else, like create laws that otherwise can survive First Amendment scrutiny that would say that this is illegal for one reason or another. At that point, you can argue whether or not you need Section 230 on or off, or can you create certain exceptions to it. Mike Smith. I suspect you're a sock puppet of Naomi. Regardless, this is YouTuber Law stream about the issue of putting together an FTC complaint for the purpose of getting an investigation launched. Alex Fry, thanks for answering the long question. Always loving watching the videos and looking forward to a great progress I'm sure you all will make. Thank you so much. Nate, the sudden appearance of tons of trolls tell me someone is trying to not this down. Used to be such a crisp chat. You all knew this was going to be coming at one point or another, so the have to be able to tune out people, you know, and we'll just move forward. Nope, help, nope. Because they came for our minds, we said nothing. They came for our hopes, we said nothing. They came for our soul, and still we said nothing. Now they're coming for our lives. So what it's going to take? Nice change there. Tom Bagiotas. When will there be a YouTube alternative? Obviously, some sites have tried and they themselves have lost processing, or, you know, whether it was Gab or BitChute that got hurt through the process. Now, does that mean that they will be true rivals at the scale? Maybe not. But we've got to stop thinking that the next Facebook would look like Facebook, only better. Was there an opportunity for Facebook to be dethroned? Absolutely. It was called Instagram. And if Instagram wasn't bought by Facebook, I suspect that you would have a real competitor to Facebook, one that can actually maybe buy Facebook rather than the other way around. But so I think that a competitor to YouTube will look very different. Now, it might be something like a BitChute, but it might look like what, you know, short clips of videos or other ways of sharing videos, other ways of engaging in conversation, something we have not seen. It might be a mobile-only platform, not a web-based platform. There could be a lot of things. It just, investors need to know that if they build competitors, even if they look very, very different, there's not going to be concerted effort to kill them by those companies. There's always going to be competition, and that's what the marketplace is all about. That's not really an issue. This is about undermining competition in the marketplace. So will there be something? There would be. It's just going to probably look very, very different than what we're thinking. It's not going to be a better YouTube. It's probably going to look very, very different. Nate. Oh, what did I... Script chat. Is the marketplace of ideas considered a literal marketplace now that ideas are being monetized by creators? If so, who brings it to market, Sargon or Patreon? Is it anti-competitive? Oh, wow. That's a complicated question. The marketplace of ideas. No, it's not... it's not like that. Yeah, it's obviously a play on word that says that we should all be sharing our opinion, and the strongest opinion, the one that can capture the most hearts and mind, wins out. I mean, that's at the heart of what I've always thought of as the greatest strength of the United States, the idea that we are in a country that is not afraid of idea, because ultimately it wants to encourage people to express it, because that gives us an opportunity to have a discussion, learn from people we disagree with, and maybe teach something to those who disagree. We are better off when we are sharing our ideas rather than hiding them and only expressing what is otherwise acceptable. So The undermining of the marketplace is really more of a reference to the fact that some people believe that there should not be competition in the marketplace, or at least competition should be limited to acceptable acceptable ways of expressing yourself, or acceptable individuals who they feel should or should not be speaking. Now, who brings it to market? Well, it's the content creator. There's no doubt that it is the speaker that brings it to market. In my opinion, it's not Patreon. Now, Patreon would argue that in banning individual, that's its own expression. So it's a creator by banning individual. And legally, that is true. But do you think that they create anything productive through banning individual? Is that a productive act? No, it's the content creators who are doing so. A reaction by a company that is based on 200 years of history that over time developed to mean freedom of speech to these artificial entities is not the same thing as actually creating. So legally, it's understandable. There is no single case that said these companies have freedom of speech on equal, so the Patreon's ban is on par legally with whatever Sargon is saying. That was just the consequence of 200 years worth of history, tiny little decisions that didn't seem at the time so important that build up to the concept of, short of voting, companies are pretty much the same as individuals, and these artificial entities now have those rights. So legally, both of them are expressive content. Both of them are bringing ideas to the marketplace. In reality, it's really only the content creator. But there is this discontinuity between what the law says is creation versus what we know in the marketplace is actually creation of content. John Taylor, thank you so much for the super chat. For Naomi Yashinko. Okay. Second Fleet Actual. Those categories are already protected in DC and other places. Does that change anything? So, okay, so we talked about before, content, political association, I don't think political speech, is protected in California and in New York, but only with reference to employment. Means your employer cannot fire you because you support a political candidate. That's it. Nothing else. In DC, it is broader, but nobody has tested it within DC. Does it mean, again, I don't want to speak because I'm not certain, but last time I looked, I believe it says that political association is protected, and it doesn't limit it to only employment cases. So it's theoretically possible for somebody to bring a case saying that it is a protected. It is protected. Political association is a protected class that can be sued for. The difficulty then becomes to the idea that whether or not these online platforms are public accommodations. We know that they're going to be protected to whatever extent we don't know, but we know that it's going to be protected in other kind of public accommodations. So it's going to be in homes, in rental apartment, in hotels, in restaurants, in some retail shops. We know that where the law extended to things like finance or which all tied back to housing, that's going to be protected, and employment. But is that going to be stretched onto websites? Today, we don't really have any consistency that say that these websites are public accommodation. There's very limited cases, and those that go that far seem to indicate that it's only to the extent to which they are a required adjunct to a brick and mortar store. So to the extent to which Best Buy has a sale, and the only way to actually take advantage of that sale is to go through their online store, the argument among some of the court, not universally, that at that point the website is also a public accommodation. That would not necessarily stretch to Amazon, that doesn't have physical space and doesn't have those kind of requirements where you have to use your online in order to get into the brick and mortar. So there are definitely challenges that, but nobody ever really went that far. Nate, for one market to crowd out another payment processing market crowding out ideas market. I'm not sure how to answer it. I think that's a statement, not an answer, right? Nate, defamation question well answered. Thank you. Patman Sports. Have you taken this story to local TV station, local newspaper, local radio station, etc.? Local meaning serving a city, town. No, I have not. I mean, that's kind of stuff we need as an organization to build. That the more legs the story has, the more chance that the FTC would take it on and start investigation, right? Again, I'm not asking the FTC to reach a specific conclusion. I believe the evidence there that merits their investigation into it, subpoena all those internal documents, and confidentiality through confidential examination, take a look and decide whether or not they should go forward with an investigation. That's what I'm calling for. To get to that point, there has to be some recognition by the FTC that this is an important enough story, that this is something that has an impact on the marketplace. So what you're describing is very important, but that's kind of like what an organization has to be built to take on. That's why we need more and more people. We need people that write press releases. We need people to write articles that get submitted. We need people that are sending excerpts to different radio stations or different TV stations and get the story going, you know. And it doesn't have necessarily always be me. People can have these conversations without me. I'm not a necessary part of it, but the story has to be told, because the more the story expands, the greater likelihood that the FTC will take it on. Jim P, thank you so much for the super chat. When I was an executive was true, but only remove posts of certain opinion, the situation of today. That's editorializing version of the original content. You saying New York Times is subject to the same law as Google? No. The New York Times is subject to the law as it's been for a very long time, and the way it was prior to 1996. There was no Google in 1996. At that point, we're talking about, was there even American Online? I don't remember. There was a CompuServe, there was Prodigy. This was before the internet as we knew it, where you basically used, you know, baud modems, like 1200, those 7200 baud modems to go through into the internet, and you were hoping that something on the other line, maybe other side, something interesting, but we didn't have the World Wide Web as we have today, so it was a very, very different world. But the papers are in the same place they were back in 96, where whether or not they are simply printing something versus actually editorializing versus actually participating in the writing process, maybe managing what's being said and stuff, that does make a difference as to the level of liability associated with what was written. Okay, so again, we're talking about if they agree to print a letter that you submit, and let's say it's somehow defamation, whether or not the New York Times is now liable for defamation for allowing you to submit it, right? Platforms are not subject to that law at all, regardless of whether or not they are technically an editor or a platform. They are immune from that completely. They can be, it's a different theory. It's not based on them editorializing. It's not the platform versus publisher thing. But the idea, if they get into a point where, for instance, you post something online, they decide it's not acceptable, they put a disclaimer. Now, they may be liable now for having put a disclaimer, but it's only to the extent to which that disclaimer now causes damage. Let's say it in itself is defamatory, or it support what is otherwise a defamatory language, or maybe it says something about you as the post, you know. So they're liable for their own action, but it's not the same as the New York Times, which of course they're liable for their own actions and what they write, but they can also be liable for content they print belonging to other people, or if they work with them on specific articles where they're editorializing. So no, Google and the New York Times are subject to different laws. Patman Sports. Oh no. Bart Silverstein. Perhaps the banking regulation could be extended to include processing of financial transaction. That will not. Yeah, I mean, I'm not convinced that right now you couldn't do it too. I mean, without them being extending, I think that if you showed this to, if there was discrimination based on one of the protected classes that now protects banking, then that I think a judge will extend it. But the problem is that political speech or association is not one of the listed political categories that is protected when it comes to banking. So if you're an elderly man and you're being discriminated when it comes to opening up a bank account, you can sue. I forgot the name right now. It's not the Fair Credit Act, but something along those lines that actually creates a kind of anti-discrimination. But if you are prevented from actually opening up a bank account because they don't like what you're saying online, that law does not apply. So they would have to, it's less of a problem extending it from banks to credit card. It's because it deals in credit facilities, so arguably things like PayPal would be covered anyway. But it's more about whether or not there needs to be a recognition that there is a category of protected class that needs to be added, like political speech or association or something along those lines that's broad enough. Garrett Claiborne, if YouTube's TOS isn't enough to make it a public square, is it possible for a platform to declare itself a public square as a contract with its users not to betray free speech? Okay. If I start a platform and I say this, through the terms of service, this is a public square, everybody is welcome to speak, we're going to adhere to the same standards as the US government, and then I go back on it, then you can't sue me under the same law that you might be able to sue the US government. You can only sue me for breach of contract. So there's the difference. So yes, if I make a promise and I don't live by it, you can arguably sue me for it. But you have to understand that that's been tried. That's what the Prager University lawsuit was all about, right? They said, and they wrote about it extensively, that YouTube promoted itself as a place for free speech. And they showed proof in a lot of advertisements and a lot of posts that they are saying that we welcome, we respect free speech. This is a place for people to come and speak. Now, but they hurt, according to PragerU's ability to monetize their videos, because they took their videos and they put them in this kind of a restricted area that is not accessible to children. Saying, well, they violated what they actually agreed to. So some of the argument that they lost on was the idea that this turned into a public square. If you want to, we can talk about it, but it's not true. You cannot make a declaration, even through terms of service, and become a real public square. Because this is private property. You would have to effectively go through a legal process of actually contributing your property to the public, to a public asset. If you have a piece of land and you want it to turn it into a park, you don't say, now it's a park. You have to go through a process of actually deeding it over to the government. So mere speech is not enough, and they lost that. But they also lost it based on a contractual thing, because the court looked at it and said, well, is that really what YouTube said? Is that a promise, or is that just marketing speak? And basically the court said, this is just marketing speak. You know, if I make a statement that my platform is a place for free speech, that's not a commitment. If I wrote it down and set rules and then did not live by those rules, you know, then arguably you got a case for a breach of contract. But that's not the same as saying that it's a public square. It's a breach of contract issue, which is very, very different. And now you've got to prove damages. And it's a much more difficult process than it is, you know, trying to win it based on a public square. Hope that was clear. RMS Gigantic. So when Reddit administration actively edited users' platform without making them as such, changing spez in a series of that to a different users, can legal action be taken? The answer, okay. When administrators change, even when they change the names, yes, they are liable as to their changes they are made. They are not protected by Section 230 because that has nothing to do with the content. This has to do with their own speak. So to give you an example here, because I don't know what we're talking about here specifically, but let's say I want to make a statement. Let's make it easier. I want to make a statement online that otherwise is offensive, right? I put it on Reddit. The Reddit administrator says, no, I'm going to move this and attribute it to somebody else. They are not immune because they're now attributed that statement to somebody else to the extent to which that statement now damages that individual. They can sue the administrator because that was their action, the attribution part of it. So, yes, there could be liability associated with the edits they make, but then you have to accept that those edits are created some sort of a liability. Something happened, you know, attributing to the wrong person, which can create liability, or money was going to be made by individual, let's say, and they changed it and it was made by somebody else. So you would have to attribute that change to a liability, at which point there could be. And a lot of time the reality is that there is not enough money in it. Just because something was done wrong does not mean there's enough money in it. So those lawsuits don't usually go very far. So you'd have to analyze what was changed, then attribute damages to that change, and then you can sue under if it's enough money. Hey, what is significant of Schmidt-Mundt modernization 2012 and DAA? Should we make? I don't have a clue what we're talking about here. I apologize. Nate, do you think Section 230 contributed to fake news? Nobody online is liable. Okay, yes, it contributed to fake news, but it also contributed to the very fact that we are now streaming on YouTube. Without Section 230, this would never be allowed. If YouTube now was liable for everything I said and everything that you guys typed, can you imagine that YouTube would ever want to allow for that? So yes, there is bad side to Section 230, but everything that we like on the internet is directly attributable to Section 230. I wouldn't say people like Facebook, but all of Facebook is Section 230. Without it, it's not that you're going to get rid of fake news. You're going to get rid of everything. Your pictures to grandma, because they'll be concerned about potential liability associated with that picture. So every user-generated content potentially would go away, or rather is there because of Section 230. It would have been much, much more difficult without it. Mr. Giggs, say that this gets investigated. They say they find no collusion. Where does that leave us? We will always have to keep looking over our shoulder. Were there any recourse at that point? Okay, so if they go through that and they say, we looked through all the confidential documentation, we did that, is there, and we found no collusion. Now, be good to know what their investigation was. Was it completely limited there? Did they look at some of the emails and stuff coming from MasterCard and Visa to that? Nonetheless, let's say that's what's said. That's fine. There are, like I said, other stuff to do. I want to make sure that the marketplace is free for competition. If the FTC tells me that it is, I'll respect that. See, I followed a lot of what they've been doing over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I think that the FTC is a group of professionals. They do this for a living. While they may take on cases because they see the popularity online, stuff like that, they are largely unaffected by the political winds. They don't have to answer to the president or to Congress, and they just do their job. And they do it very effectively. It's a very, very powerful agency. So I would respect that. Now, many people have argued that what I'm doing here is a small solution to a much bigger problem. I agree with that. But if all the data, if all the evidence is pointing toward collusion or abusive monopoly, and yet they find that it's not there, okay, so now it's the next step, which the next step in my mind today is state-level legislative changes that are fairly easy to implement, that will make wide positive impact on everybody's life. Nothing to even far beyond even the one issue we're talking about here. Change the balance of power when it comes to you versus Amazon, you versus Twitter. Everything that we do online, it just changes the entire balance of power. There's a lot that you can do with state level legislative action that would happen one way or another. So it's possible that they would find it. I don't think so. But if they find that there was no collusion, then we move on to the next step. That's really what there's other things you can do to change. And frankly, like I said, what I'm doing here, it's not enough. It's small. I admit to it. It's a small battle just trying to preserve the competition in the marketplace so that people have alternative platform. But it's not enough to solve the bigger problem. So then you move on to the other issues. Or other solutions. Hey, please, I don't know what that means again. Cerlidian Illyrium. The marketplace of ideas, the idea that if you give all ideas the same chance to promote these ideas, the best idea will come through eventually. Good way of describing it. Maladjusted. 1. With what you've described, things like Google having to be broken up, is there some similarity to what happened to Microsoft and Internet Explorer a few years back? Well, I mean, there are issues with modern day antitrust, which is part of the problem here. But in many ways, the investigation by the FTC and the European equivalent when it came to Microsoft was very, very successful. Even though the FTC won an order to have Microsoft broken up, and it actually never actually took place, even though it won the fact that it should be broken apart, it made a massive difference in the way that Microsoft actually behaved. And through, unfortunately, the leaking of confidential information through the FTC, that did a bad job in actually keeping the information confidential, we learned that it actually had a massive impact, and we are the beneficiaries of that. So even if that does not happen, because I'm not necessarily advocating here for the breaking up of companies, there's argument that certain services are so massive and so critical that they should be broken up, like Google search from just about everything else, right? That there might be an argument there, but I'm not really calling for that. That's not really something I'm thinking about. We need that. That's not a solution in my mind. Let the investigation move forward and let the chips fall where they may. But you can see the positive impact that the FTC had through their investigation of what Microsoft did with Explorer and how basically it damaged Netscape. Mark Neal. From what I've read on Article 230, they cannot be held liable for damages when taking action in good faith. What does in good faith mean literally in this regard? Continued. If it could be shown they were not acting in good faith, could they then be held liable for breach of contract type violation? Let's put it into perspective based on existing case law, right? You can't just read the law. You have to read all of the cases that interpreted the law, the way the courts, and they've pretty much been uniform. Let's get this straight. If they want to terminate anybody's account on their platform, regardless of the reason for it, they're okay, with very few exceptions. And it's not going to be based on good faith. It's going to be based on whether or not that the action itself is otherwise illegal. So there are certain things related to defamation, certain action related to incitement, certain things related to copyright infringement, intellectual property, certain action related to antitrust. So outside of certain exceptions built into the law, and it's not going to be good faith. It's not going to be whether or not they're neutral. Specific things built into the law, which are very, very narrow, they can exclude people. So the problem is that the law has been, that's not a problem, it's the reality of our legal system. The law has been looked at just dozens of times, and the ruling is always consistent. So unless there is specific illegality associated with the removal, it's not going to go forward. And most of the breach of contracts never go forward because well, frankly, the arguments so far have been really, really bad, and often attributed. It's often attributed to what is the courts consider marketing speak, like boasting. You know, we allow people to say whatever they want to and say, well, no, that does not match the agreement, or the agreement changes over time, and people are then saying, well, it should not have changed because we didn't have sufficient notice. But the court recognizes that those contracts right now, the way they're drafted, because there's no contrary law under state law, allows them to revise these agreements without any real notice at the drop of a hat. So right now, good faith is not going to get you anywhere. Jim P, thank you so much for the super chat. I'm not getting my point across very well. Or maybe I'm not understanding it. I'm saying that Twitter et al. Do not deserve platform status if they edit out all opinions contrary to theirs. That this violates conditions for platform status, not regarding liability. Well, the only status that there is with regard to liability. So, like I said, this concept of a platform was important before Section 230. But once you remove liability, that distinction doesn't matter. So we can have an intellectual discussion about whether or not they're a platform or an editor, publisher, whatever you want to call to it. But if there's no liability associated with it, why does it matter? So that's kind of the argument here. So now let's take that away. Are platforms permitted to exclude all opinions that is not in agreement or in congruence with what they think? The answer is yes. It's called freedom of speech. Taking away anything else, like antitrust, where it's collusion, right? But in and of itself, the answer is yes, they could do that. So I'm gonna keep going to liability. I know that's not what you want to talk about, but the concept of this, the distinction between the two are not important if there is no liability associated with it, right? Unless I'm missing something here. Why would it be important whether or not they're a platform, an editor, or publisher if there's no liability, one or the other? It's important, let's say, the New York Times versus Facebook, because there's a nature of the liability, because the minute liability was taken off the table when it comes to those platforms, that created user-generated content, basically Web 2.0. So that was the big differential. So without legal liability, nobody cares about what they call you. Let me know if I'm missing out what you're saying here. Mark Neal. No, I already did that. Nate, do you have a favorite legal writer? Whew, a legal writer. No, I'm going through, if you look down at below at the things, I'm going through different books over time. Some of them are lost, some are not. I've just taken one about, I think, something about bigness. I forgot what it's called, about antitrust. But no, I kind of search for books that'll be of interest, things I can learn from. I've read some great books over time. You can see The Great Dissent. Great book down below, all about Justice Holmes. He quoted the famous saying, freedom for the thoughts we hate. He created modern free speech as we know it. He's the father of just about every case that you can think of, from the ability of the most dejected, the most marginalized people to speak their mind and say things that everybody disagrees with. He stood up when so many of the people around him were communist and socialist, where they endangered fear, where the government tried to make sure that they lose their jobs and they're not permitted to speak. He stood up for them. So it tells an incredible story. Not a perfect individual, not by any stretch, but this guy made a huge difference throughout history. So there's great books, but I don't generally think of great legal writers. Cons Clanstith. Could a person being denied access to banking services for not holding the same religious dogma as the bank management be a violation? Yes. That definitely is, because religion is one of the protected classes. So absolutely, religion is. Now, again, you have to prove that you were discriminated based on your religion, right? And yes, it's not your speech, but rather your belief system. So, but absolutely, if you are not permitted to open up an account based on your religious belief, you know, that would be against the law. Matt Ferg. Doesn't PragerU just lie on many of their videos? When looking through their sources on one of the videos, they had completely lied about what was said. I couldn't respond to that because I don't really watch their videos. I mean, at the time when the case was going through the courts, I watched a few to understand what they're talking about, what kind of content, but otherwise I don't really, to me, their content seems more alongside of opinion rather than fact, meaning they have an opinion on how, let's say, the Bible would interpret regular events happening out there. So it's more about, so it was more opinion than factual based, but you would know more because I don't really watch their content enough to give an opinion. Contra Joe. If Facebook TOS takes copyright of user content, why do they post their content? Why do people post their content that they claim to do copyrights to themselves on Facebook? Okay, so when you post anything, the general, what's happening generally legally is you are giving a license to the platforms. Platforms almost never, and I'm saying almost because there have been some cases over whether or not it happened in the past, they don't want your copyright. They don't want ownership of what you're saying because they don't want liability associated with what you wrote. They only want a license to do whatever the hell they want to do with it, right? So you post something to Facebook, they have a license to do whatever the hell they want with it. You posted a picture, technically they can actually put it on a billboard and not pay you a dime. They can use it on some online marketing campaign because everybody loves it and generates cash for them and don't have to pay you. That's really what it's about. So anything you post, you have given kind of a lifetime, not subject to termination, worldwide, unlimited license to the platform to effectively do whatever they want to. There have been some limited cases where platform claim through the terms of service that when you post something is theirs and you can never, ever ask them to remove it. You do not have the power to remove it. You cannot say, my license to you is terminated. None of that. So there have been some of those cases, but it have to be very, very specific. You have to say that in doing this, you are somehow transferring ownership to me, and you basically never ever see that. And again, there's some specific kind of platform where that's been closer, which those are kind of the complaint platforms where people go on to just vent about a company they don't like, stuff like that, because those companies want to make sure that you never remove it. And they want to be protected and keep those kind of complaints. So even if you regret it, you'll never be allowed to remove it. So under very few exceptions, it's only if it's very, very specific. Reverend C. Russell. Does Canadian law apply to the YouTube contract for a Canadian YouTuber? If so, Canadian law has a requirement for good faith dealing in all contracts. The answer is yes. So the reality is that every company wants you to abide by the laws of the country in which they're in, but normally countries disagree. They're saying you are engaging with our citizens, you've got to be subject to local laws. So that usually is the case. And if there was in fact a case like that, my suspicion is that a Canadian court will take that on. Now, what does that mean? How good faith will be interpreted in Canada? I just don't have enough experience to tell you that. But yes, you could drag these companies into your own country, the country where the user is at. Conclanseth. What is your thoughts on the Illinois bill demanding firearm owners turn over their social media password to the government? Well, first of all, I don't know that law, so I couldn't tell you. I'm going to take a look. Because, hold on a second, let me just erase everything else here. I forgot to erase things, so I'm getting confused here. Sorry. Okay. I don't know of the law, so I didn't know that actually happened. The idea that you're required to turn over your password, so I'm speaking as if it's true because I don't know. Your password to social media, I think that would be a violation of you required to give that would be a violation of federal law. You are not required to provide information that is potentially self-incriminating, and so that would not be. So if the police stops you and they look at your phone and they say, give me the password, you're not required to give that because you're not allowed. There is no law that can force you to self-incriminate yourself to the extent to which they feel that's going to do it. So that'd be a violation of constitutional law. So I don't think it needs to. So I can't see it going anywhere. Sometimes it takes a few years by the time it makes its way to the Supreme Court, unless it's some sort of an expedited track that it goes on because it's such an important thing. So that it kind of skips everything and goes right to the Supreme Court. So general thing about it, it's just a violation of our rights against self-incrimination. So we're not required to do that. It's just a case. It's not definitive. A case, I think out in California, that said that even, you know, your thumbprints on your phone or facial recognition is part of unlocking those phones. Also, are you cannot be forced to provide as part of self-incrimination. So, but passwords that definitely would be a violation of constitutional law. So, to the extent to which it happened, I mean, I would be interested to see how it actually resolved. Nate. When does an ideology become a religion in a legal sense? Many political ideologies are functionally indistinguishable from religion. Wow. That's a question I cannot answer because I don't know if the law looks at the value of the ideology, that somehow there are ideologies which are valid enough to become religion versus other ones. That's something that the government is not permitted to do. It cannot pass its own judgment on the validity of a religion here. So there are other standards that are in play involving, you know, what is or not leave religious status. And when we're talking about what the law considered, 99% of it is about taxes. You know, do they have to pay taxes and stuff like that? So, but this is just completely out of my wheelhouse. I just don't know enough about that. Sorry. Nope, health, nope. About you, what do you and Sprinkles like to drink on a quiet night together? I'm considering paying you for a bottle. Oh my god. I can tell you that it kind of depends. If we're going with our friends, because our friends are wine drinkers, we usually drink. Usually it will be like a Pinot Noir or a Merlot with like not usually the Cabernet, so a little milder in flavors. But if it's me and my wife alone, usually it's a tequila-based drink. You know, a nice tequila. If I had to guess, we usually are mixing it with just some seltzer, some soda water, and lime. That's perfect, you know. You don't feel anything the night after. There's never a hangover, nothing like that. It's just clean alcohol. That's usually I would say, tequila. I think we're done. And it is 9:43. Excellent. Thank you so much, guys, for showing up. What's going to happen here is, like I told you before, just what I've done up until a month ago and for the past few months before that, which is this video for now is going to stay online, but probably between tonight and tomorrow probably be taken down and reposted to the secondary channel, Legal Dissent. And this channel will only have like a summary version of the update. And that's usually how it's going to be handled. Probably not going to leave the full live stream on this channel. Anyway, if you have any questions, any concerns, anything you want to discuss, just leave them down below. I'd love to talk to you. I'll see you next time.